Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great is one of the most legendary military leaders in history, conquering an empire that stretched from Greece all the way to India. Taking the throne at just 20 years old after the assassination of his father, King Philip II, Alexander wasted no time making a name for himself. He crushed larger Persian armies led by Darius III, with one of his most famous victories being the Battle of Gaugamela in 331 BC. What made Alexander so remarkable was his ability to adapt to different enemies, terrains, and challenges. His creative use of the phalanx formation, cavalry, and siege tactics gave him an edge over seemingly unbeatable odds. Alexander wasn't just a fighter, he was a leader who inspired loyalty and bravery in his troops, leading them into battle personally. Although he died young at 32, leaving his massive empire fractured, his strategies and leadership style left an undeniable mark on military history. Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar wasn't just a politician, he was a battlefield mastermind. His conquest of Gaul was a career-defining campaign where he showed incredible ingenuity, defeating much larger Gallic forces. His victory at the Battle of Alesia in 52 BC is a prime example of his brilliance. Despite being surrounded, Caesar built double fortifications to trap both the enemy inside and reinforcements outside, leading to total victory. Caesar was also a master of inspiring loyalty in his troops, often fighting alongside them and sharing their hardships. Beyond Gaul, he led daring expeditions into Britain and triumphed in a civil war against Pompey. His bold decision to cross the Rubicon in 49 BC was the start of his rise to dictatorship. Though he was assassinated in 44 BC, his military campaigns and leadership left a lasting impact on Rome and the world. Hannibal Barca. Hannibal Barca is best remembered for his bold and audacious campaigns against Rome during the Second Punic War. His most famous feat, leading an army, including war elephants, over the Alps to surprise the Romans in their own territory, a move no one saw coming. Hannibal's victory at the Battle of Cannae in 216 BC is still studied in military academies today. He used a brilliant strategy to encircle and annihilate a much larger Roman army, dealing them one of their worst defeats ever. Hannibal's genius lay in his ability to outthink and outmaneuver his enemies. He used the terrain to his advantage, utilized his cavalry expertly, and always kept the Romans guessing. Despite his success, Hannibal couldn't deliver the knockout blow to Rome, and eventually the tide turned against him. Still, his resourcefulness and tactical brilliance cement his place as one of the greatest generals of all time. Subutai, one of Genghis Khan's top generals, was a tactical genius who helped expand the Mongol Empire across Asia and into Europe. Known for his ability to plan massive campaigns over vast distances, Subutai led simultaneous invasions that outflanked and crushed his enemies. His success at the Battle of Mohi in Hungary and his campaigns in Eastern Europe showed how effective the Mongols were under his command. Subutai was a master of feigned retreats, ambushes, and coordinated attacks by multiple armies. He used mobility and speed to his advantage, ensuring the Mongols stayed one step ahead of their enemies. Subutai's strategies were so effective that they left entire regions devastated and unable to resist further Mongol advances. His contributions to the empire's expansion make him one of the most accomplished generals in history. Timur, also known as Tamerlane, was a Central Asian conqueror who sought to revive the Mongol Empire under his leadership. Claiming descent from Genghis Khan, Timur built a vast empire stretching from Persia to India, Anatolia, and parts of Russia. Known for his brutal campaigns, Timur's military tactics combined psychological warfare, relentless sieges, and highly disciplined cavalry units. One of his most famous victories was the Battle of Ankara in 1402, where he defeated the Ottoman Sultan Bayezid I and temporarily halted the expansion of the Ottoman Empire. Timur was notorious for his ruthlessness, often massacring entire cities to instill fear. Despite this, he was also a patron of art and culture, transforming Samarkand into a thriving cultural and architectural hub. Attila the Hun. Known as the Scourge of God, Attila the Hun was one of the most feared conquerors of the ancient world. Leading the Huns, a nomadic people from Central Asia, Attila invaded the Eastern and Western Roman empires, wreaking havoc across Europe. His campaigns against the Romans in the 5th century exposed the vulnerabilities of the once mighty empire. Attila's greatest military achievements included the Battle of the Catalonian Plains in 451, where his forces clashed with a coalition of Roman and Visigothic armies. Although not a decisive victory, the battle demonstrated his ability to challenge even the strongest opponents. Attila's invasions extended as far as northern Italy, where cities like Aquileia were razed. Despite his ferocity, Attila was also a shrewd diplomat, using alliances and intimidation to secure his dominance. His sudden death in 453 marked the end of Hunnic expansion. Mehmed II, known as Mehmed the Conqueror, this Ottoman Sultan is best remembered for capturing Constantinople in 1453, marking the end of the Roman Empire and the rise of the Ottoman Empire as a dominant power. Mehmed's siege of Constantinople involved innovative use of cannons, including the massive Orban cannon, which breached the city's formidable walls. His victory transformed the city into Istanbul, the Ottoman capital. Mehmed continued his conquests throughout the Balkans and Anatolia, consolidating Ottoman control and expanding into Europe. A visionary leader, he also promoted religious tolerance and turned Istanbul into a cultural and economic center. Mehmed's military and administrative reforms laid the groundwork for the Ottoman Empire's golden age. Thutmose III, often referred to as the Napoleon of ancient Egypt, was one of the greatest pharaohs and military leaders of the New Kingdom. His reign marked the peak of Egyptian imperial power as he led 17 successful military campaigns across Canaan, Syria, and the Euphrates River, expanding Egypt's influence into the ancient Near East. Thutmose's most famous victory was the Battle of Megiddo, where he employed brilliant tactical maneuvers to defeat a coalition of Canaanite rulers. His ability to conduct long-range campaigns, utilize siege warfare, and maintain supply lines over vast distances set him apart as a military innovator. Thutmose III's conquests solidified Egypt's position as a dominant power in the ancient world. Cyrus the Great. Cyrus the Great, founder of the Achaemenid Empire, is one of history's most celebrated conquerors. He united the Medes and Persians, establishing the first true empire in history, which stretched from India to the Mediterranean Sea. Cyrus was known not only for his military genius, but also for his policies of tolerance and governance, which allowed him to maintain control over a diverse empire. His conquest of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, including the legendary capture of Babylon, was achieved without significant bloodshed and marked a turning point in ancient history. Cyrus's military genius lay in his ability to integrate conquered peoples into his army and administration. His strategies and diplomatic skills ensured stability across his vast empire, earning him admiration as a king of kings. Charlemagne. Known as Charles the Great, Charlemagne was the first emperor of the Holy Roman Empire and a pivotal figure in medieval Europe. Over his 46-year reign, he expanded his empire to include modern-day France, Germany, Italy, and parts of Spain. Charlemagne's campaigns against the Saxons, Lombards, and Moors solidified his reputation as a skilled and relentless military leader. His conquest of the Saxons, despite their fierce resistance, marked a turning point in the Christianization of Northern Europe. Charlemagne was not just a conqueror, but also a reformer. He established administrative systems to govern his vast empire, promoted education, and encouraged a cultural revival known as the Carolingian Renaissance. His efforts laid the groundwork for European unity and the concept of Christendom. Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon Bonaparte is a name that immediately comes to mind when talking about military genius. Rising from humble beginnings, he became Emperor of France and reshaped the map of Europe during the Napoleonic Wars. His most famous victory was at Austerlitz in 1805, where he outmaneuvered larger Austrian and Russian forces with brilliant strategy. Napoleon's genius lay in his ability to predict his enemy's moves and concentrate his forces at decisive points on the battlefield. One of his major innovations was the use of corps, self-sufficient army units that could move independently but coordinate in larger battles. He also revolutionized the use of artillery, turning it into a deadly mobile force. Napoleon was nearly unbeatable at his peak, but his infamous invasion of Russia in 1812, where he underestimated the Russian winter and their scorched earth tactics, led to his downfall. Still, his legacy as a master tactician continues to influence modern warfare. Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan, born Temujin, rose from a tough childhood to become the founder of the Mongol Empire, the largest contiguous empire in history. By uniting the fiercely independent Mongol tribes, Genghis created a disciplined and fast-moving army that overwhelmed opponents across Asia and Europe. His military campaigns were devastating. He didn't just win battles, he crushed entire kingdoms. One of Genghis Khan's most brilliant moves was his use of psychological warfare and deceptive tactics, like feigned retreats. He also mastered logistics, making sure his armies could move quickly over long distances. His defeat of the Khwarezmian Empire in 1219 to 1221 showed how deadly his strategies were. Cities were razed, populations decimated, and surviving enemies often surrendered out of sheer terror. Despite his brutality, Genghis was an innovator. incorporating different cultures and technologies into his empire. His military strategies forever changed how wars were fought. Saladin, or Salah al-Din, was a Kurdish Muslim leader renowned for his chivalry and military prowess during the Crusades. As Sultan of Egypt and Syria, he united the Muslim world and led the campaign to recapture Jerusalem from the Crusaders, culminating in his famous victory at the Battle of Hattin in 1187. Saladin's genius lay in his ability to rally divided Muslim factions under one banner and fight against the Crusader states. His strategic victories in Syria, the Holy Land, and Egypt established the Ayyubid dynasty. Despite his military prowess, Saladin is also remembered for his diplomacy and humanity. He spared civilians during his conquests and treated captured enemies, including Richard the Lionheart, with respect. His combination of military skill and magnanimity left a lasting legacy in both the Muslim and Christian worlds. Sargon of Akkad. Sargon of Akkad is considered one of history's first great conquerors. He established the Akkadian Empire, the world's first known empire, uniting Mesopotamia under his rule. Sargon's military campaigns extended his influence from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean, creating a model for future empires. Sargon's success was due to his innovative use of professional armies and his ability to integrate conquered territories into a centralized administration. His reign marked the beginning of a new era in the ancient Near East, and his legacy influenced generations of rulers. Darius I, Darius the Great, one of the successors of Cyrus the Great, expanded the Achaemenid Empire to its zenith, encompassing parts of Europe, Asia, and Africa. Darius is remembered for consolidating Persian control and embarking on ambitious campaigns, including the failed invasion of Greece in Battle of Marathon, 490 BC. Beyond his military achievements, Darius was a brilliant administrator who developed an efficient imperial system with roads, standardized currency, and administrative reforms that kept his vast empire united. His reign is often considered the golden age of the Persian Empire. Sun Tzu. Sun Tzu might not have commanded armies on massive battlefields, but his contributions to military strategy through his work, The Art of War, make him one of the most influential military minds in history. Written during the Eastern Zhou period, this treatise outlines principles of warfare that are still relevant today, not just in military academies, but also in business and politics. Sun Tzu emphasized the importance of strategy over brute force. He believed in deception, knowing your enemy, and achieving victory without unnecessary bloodshed. Concepts like all warfare is based on deception and the supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting reflect his approach to conflict. While less is known about his personal life and battles, his ideas influenced countless generals throughout history, from ancient China to modern commanders. Ashoka the Great. Ashoka was one of India's most powerful rulers, expanding the Maurya Empire to cover nearly the entire Indian subcontinent. His military campaigns, particularly the brutal conquest of Kalinga, established his dominance but also led to a profound personal transformation. After witnessing the suffering caused by his wars, Ashoka embraced Buddhism and dedicated himself to spreading peace, tolerance, and non-violence. While Ashoka's conquests were impressive, his true greatness lies in his governance. He promoted welfare programs and infrastructure development. Babur. Babur was the founder of the Mughal Empire in India, a dynasty that would rule for over 300 years. A descendant of Timur and Genghis Khan, Babur combined their legacies of conquest with his own military brilliance. His victory at the Battle of Panipat in 1526, where he defeated the Sultan of Delhi with a smaller, disciplined army, marked the beginning of Mughal rule in India. Babur's use of innovative tactics, such as mobile artillery and superior cavalry, gave him an edge over his enemies. Beyond his military achievements, Babur was a cultured ruler who left a rich legacy of architecture, literature, and administration. Hitler, as the leader of Germany, became one of the most impactful figures in modern history. His aggressive leadership led to the outbreak of World War II, a conflict that changed the world forever. Hitler's rise to power was fueled by his vision of a German empire and a deep-rooted belief in racial superiority. Once in control, he transformed Germany into a military powerhouse. His forces used blitzkrieg tactics, fast and overwhelming military strikes that allowed them to conquer much of Europe in record time. In 1939, Germany invaded Poland, officially starting World War II, and by 1940, Hitler's army had taken down France in a stunning victory. His confidence skyrocketed as the German military seemed unstoppable, and he strengthened the Axis powers by forming alliances with Italy and Japan. But Hitler's ambition got the better of him. His biggest mistake came in 1941 when he launched Operation Barbarossa, invading the Soviet Union. The campaign stretched German forces too thin and exposed them to brutal winters and fierce Soviet resistance. On top of that, after Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, he declared war on the United States. As the war raged on, the tide began to turn against Nazi Germany. The Allies, led by the Soviet Union, the US, and Britain, scored major victories in Italy and the Eastern Front. In 1944, the D-Day invasion opened a crucial front in Western Europe, speeding up Germany's defeat. With his empire collapsing, Hitler retreated to an underground bunker in Berlin, where he spent the war's final months. As Soviet forces closed in on the city, he faced the reality of inevitable defeat. In April 1945, rather than surrender, Hitler took his own life, marking the end of the Nazi regime. Belisarius. Belisarius was one of the greatest generals in Byzantine history, serving under Emperor Justinian I. He's remembered for being a military genius who could win battles even when his forces were outnumbered and underfunded. His mission was to help Justinian restore the old Roman Empire, and he came pretty close to pulling it off with some legendary victories. Belisarius first made a name for himself during the Persian Wars, where he scored a huge win at the Battle of Dara. Despite facing a much larger Persian army, he used clever tactics and the terrain to his advantage, pulling off an epic underdog victory. But his most famous campaigns were against the Vandals and Ostrogoths. In 533 AD, he led a small army to North Africa and wiped out the Vandal kingdom in record time, capping it off with a decisive win at the Battle of Tricamarum. This victory brought North Africa back under Byzantine control. Next, he turned his sights on Italy, where he fought the Ostrogoths. He captured Rome in 536 AD and held it against a massive siege, proving his tactical brilliance once again. Cao Cao. Cao Cao was a brilliant leader during China's Three Kingdoms period. He played a key role in the fall of the Han Dynasty and the rise of the Cao Wei Kingdom, one of the three major kingdoms of the era. Cao Cao first made a name for himself during the Yellow Turban Rebellion, showing his leadership and military skills. As the Han Dynasty crumbled, he took control of Emperor Xian to legitimize his own authority. One of his biggest victories was the Battle of Guandu, where he crushed Yuan Shao's larger army by cutting off their supplies. This win solidified his control over northern China. However, his attempt to take the south ended in defeat at the Battle of Red Cliffs against Sun Quan and Liu Bei, which set the stage for China's division into three kingdoms: Wei, Shu, and Wu. Cao Cao died in 220 AD, but his legacy lived on through his son Cao Pi, who ended the Han Dynasty and officially founded the Cao Wei Kingdom. Kublai Khan. Kublai Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, was one of the Mongol Empire's most fascinating rulers. He expanded its territory and became the first non-Han emperor of China, founding the Yuan dynasty. After his older brother Monkey Khan died in 1259, Kublai fought a civil war with his brother Arik Buki to claim the title of Great Khan in 1260. Even though not all Mongol territories accepted his rule, Kublai focused on growing his domain and governing effectively. One of his biggest accomplishments was conquering Song China, completing a process started by earlier Mongol leaders. By 1279, Kublai's forces had unified China under foreign rule for the first time. He set up his capital in modern-day Beijing and declared the Yuan dynasty in 1271. However, his later years were tough. Failed invasions of Japan in 1274 and 1281, stopped by typhoons, drained resources. Rebellions, court drama, and economic troubles added to the challenges. Arthur Wellesley. Arthur Wellesley, better known as the Duke of Wellington, was a British military leader and politician famous for defeating Napoleon Bonaparte at the Battle of Waterloo in 1815, putting an end to the Napoleonic Wars. His military career took him all over the world, with major campaigns in India and the Peninsular War in Spain and Portugal, where he led British and Allied forces against Napoleon's army with incredible skill. Wellington's strength was his mastery of defensive warfare and smart use of the land. He was great at positioning his troops in tough-to-attack spots, using hills, rivers, and fortifications to force his enemies into making bad moves. Some of his biggest wins were at Assaye, Salamanca, and Vitoria, where he showed how good he was at adapting to different battlefields and opponents. At Waterloo, Wellington's army held strong against Napoleon's forces until Prussian reinforcements arrived to help finish the job. Aurelian, known as the Restorer of the World, was one of Rome's greatest emperors and military leaders. During his brief reign, he pulled the Roman Empire back from the brink of collapse during the crisis of the 3rd century, a time of chaos with civil wars, invasions, and economic disaster. Starting as a talented general, Aurelian earned a reputation for his strict discipline and tactical genius. In 270 AD, his troops declared him emperor, handing him an empire on the verge of falling apart. At that time, Rome was split into 3 parts: the Roman Empire in the center, the Gallic Empire in the west, and the Palmyrene Empire in the east. Aurelian got to work immediately. He defeated the Goths and other Germanic tribes, securing Rome's borders. Next, he turned to the Palmyrene Empire in the east, ruled by Queen Zenobia. In 272 AD, he launched a lightning campaign, crushing her forces at the battles of Amay and Emesa, and capturing Palmyra, bringing the east back under Roman control. In 274 AD, Aurelian headed west to deal with the Gallic Empire. He defeated its ruler, Tetricus I, at the Battle of Chalons, reuniting the western provinces with the rest of the empire. These victories earned him the title Restorer of the World. His reign was cut short in 275 AD when he was assassinated by his own soldiers. Khalid ibn al-Walid. Khalid ibn al-Walid, better known as the Sword of God, was one of the greatest military leaders in history. He played a huge role in expanding the early Islamic Empire, leading his armies to victory during the Ridda Wars and the early Islamic conquests. Thanks to his leadership, the Rashidun Caliphate took over much of the Arabian Peninsula, Persia, and parts of the Roman Empire. One of his most famous battles was the Battle of Yarmouk. Even though his army was way smaller, Khalid's smart strategies and knowledge of the terrain helped him crush the much larger Roman force. He was a master at planning surprise attacks, making quick retreats when needed, and tricking his enemies into bad positions. His ability to adapt and think several moves ahead made him nearly impossible to beat. No matter how outnumbered his forces were, he always found a way to win. Ivan the Terrible. Ivan IV, better known as Ivan the Terrible, was Russia's first Tsar and the guy who turned a messy medieval state into a centralized empire. His reign was a wild mix of massive expansion, important reforms, and terrifying brutality. Ivan took the throne in 1547 at just 16, after a chaotic childhood and the death of his father. Crowning himself Tsar, he made it clear he was in charge. On the positive side, Ivan expanded Russia's borders eastward by conquering the Khanates of Kazan and Astrakhan, wiping out the remnants of the Mongol Golden Horde. This gave Russia control over the Volga River and new lands for trade and colonization. But his attempts to expand west through the Livonian War didn't go as well, costing money and territory. Ivan also made some big reforms. He modernized the military, created a standing army, and updated the legal system with the Sudebnik of 1550. But for all his progress, Ivan is mostly remembered for his dark side. Ivan's personal life was just as dramatic. He was prone to paranoia and violent outbursts, and in one fit of rage, he killed his own son and heir, Ivan Ivanovich, in 1581.